Hello and welcome once again to Indiepocalypse Radio at an increasingly erratic time on a course of errands I had to run. But here we are once again live with guests from the world of 95% video games. In this case, 100% video games or video game adjacent. What are video games? But it's beyond the point. We are here going to cut through the bullshit of it all. Indiepocalypse Radio, of course, is a primarily weekly radio show somewhere between a post-con chat and an interview show I host. And I, of course, am Andrew, the editor, etc., all the stuff of Indiepocalypse. The person who you say when you go, I like what you guys do, I go, oh, that guy is just me. But it lets me be agile and lean and survive because it's only one person that you technically don't even have to pay. But all that aside, we have our guest. Our first guest you may know from the fairly newly released, like, I don't know, a month. I say fairly new, it's going to be like, I don't know, like in 3 months since it's been out. Death of a Wish.
5 months ago now.
My God, time is made up, I think. I mean, I suppose our calendars are, though they're based in some logic. Colin of Death of a Wish, also known as Me Lesson 3 on the internet. Hello, Colin. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Glad to have you here. If I've mentioned it briefly, but if people are unfamiliar, let's just cut straight to the chase. If people are unfamiliar with this turn of phrase "Death of a Wish," what does that represent?
Yeah, so I am the developer and part of the team behind the games Luca, Born of a Dream, and Death of a Wish, which are two top-down action adventure RPG type games with a very unusual art style, I've been told.
Yes, distinct, one could say.
Yeah, I'm happy you say that.
Yeah.
So Luca came out in 2018 and actually just got a physical release through the Indiepocalypse monthly game tapes.
Yes.
So thank you again for including us.
Glad to. Folks, I could talk about this forever, but I'll give Colin this time. But people just release their games physically. You can just do that.
Yeah, it's really cool. So that was kind of like part one of a kind of like not even planned duology. Like
right.
We had a Kickstarter goal where it's like, okay, you could play through the game as the rival character. And then I started working on that after the game came out, and then it became too depressing to continue working on the same game. So years later, after a strike of inspiration, I figured out what the game starring Christian, the rival character, was going to be about. And instead of it being an expansion to the original game,
right.
It just felt more appropriate to make it its own game.
Right.
That was Death of a Wish, which came out back in March.
Yes, because that is... I think in my mind, mentally, it's because I feel like I had contacted you around when Death of a Wish was coming out, and given that this month the physical edition of Luca just came out, I'm like, oh yeah, these two dates are linked in my brain, when really they are... Hey, if I plan these things better in advance, people could have simultaneous releases or whatever.
No, I mean, like, we definitely appreciate like people continuing to talk about these games because we're obviously not like huge, like take over the airways, like AAA type titles.
Yes,
at the scale we work on, it really is like the long tail of word of mouth that keeps us going.
Right. And I feel that's part of my disconnect with, like, I don't know, online indie space. Is because I feel like people forget that long tail, you know, and that's like what sustains, I think, indie artists for the most part, not like huge. I mean, most of them don't work in like big tentpole releases, you know, and like.
Yeah. It's kind of like depressing though, because like in like at least even in the space that we're working on, like we're technically a commercial developer, but a very small one. Like
Right.
we do it part time. And even then, like the strategies for like as we were coming up to a release, we're like, oh my god, we need to like send this game out to like 5,000 streamers
Oh yes.
to like even potentially get any coverage, especially since all the news sites are dying,
Right.
so to speak.
And turning into streamers as anyway.
Yeah. So it really is like even if you're not like realistically gonna get the like everyone's talking about this game for 5 days kind of response, you almost have to like act like it.
Yes.
Or yeah, you're just gonna get totally trampled underfoot.
Right. Right.
But that's why yeah, like programs and curations like Indiepocalypse are so important. It'd be nice if we had even more of these, but
Right,
I'm glad you're fighting the good fight.
Yes, yes. I will say that my strategy of eating shit for 5 years, I would not, I would not heartily recommend.
Yeah,
but eventually, I say, I mean, to be honest, I feel an undercurrent. Like, it's the weird thing where it's like, oh, I think the current generation, once the current generation of indie devs kind of burns out and flakes out, then it's like my moment, because they feel too resistant and hesitant to like, or they're too caught up in like a commercial grind set,
I mean, I wonder how much longer it even can last with like, I mean, even this week there was that piece put out by like, what's his name, Mike Rose, the No
Right.
More Robots person, where it's just like, yeah, even like the indie publishers are feeling stressed.
Yes,
And I know like, yeah, like Raw Fury came out and saying like, oh, this is all wrong actually, but like I wonder how much of that really is like there probably is a divide between the ones that have more money behind them and the ones that
Right.
still have a lot of money but not developer digital levels of money.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's not looking good. I feel
No.
like some indie publishers being like we're doing fine is like maybe missing the forest for the trees a little bit.
Right, and the question I always ask is like, how are those indie developers doing though? Or is it...
Yeah, let alone the money people, right?
Right. I feel like indie publishers like Devolver and A24 are built on the bones of 1,001 game studios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we thankfully we are not that anymore. We now have a second game.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, no, I remember after Luca came out, like I technically was a full-time indie developer, although I did do like contract work to like pay the rent. But after we released Luca, I mean, I didn't expect it to like pay my bills or anything, but it's like, all right, time to find a full-time job now. And that's like I was like a lucky indie developer, I feel like, in that I actually was able to like continue doing work even while I'm like not doing it as my full-time job. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people, and it takes like a maybe slightly diseased brain to even be like, yes, after I'm done doing my 9 to 5, I'm gonna program a whole indie video game also.
Yes. my advice is to get a 9 to 5 that has nothing to do with video games. It's it works well for me. And also like it reliably pays the bills. But like even like you mentioned Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is a weird thing for indie games, because like how many of them now, Luca came out 2018, 6-7 years later, how many indie game Kickstarters are like real Kickstarters, and how many of them are like Shenmue 3, which is like,
what's weird about that too is like, I've seen people mention Luca as an example of like, oh, like one of the like actual Kickstarter indie games that actually came out.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, even then like Kickstarter, it's maybe like always kind of been like this, but nowadays I feel like I don't hear about indie games kickstarting except as like part of like a bigger scheme to attract a publisher or something.
Right.
Or like you said, like these like ex AAA developers like the Shenmue and like the Shadow Hearts guy and the other ones that was with that. I think it was like the Wild Arms spiritual successor.
Right, right.
It's
There
really
was
like we're just
it's,
trying to find the number of people who will buy this game
right, and
and
that
like justify its development.
yeah, and it's kind of like the same thing as like it's publisher proof. It's proof to be like, hey, look, people are still interested in my. I've still got the heat. I can make my Suikoden spin-off.
Right, right.
But it's because it's like not real. Like actually, like there's like a weird understanding that it's not actually funding development of the game and like directly. It's like implicitly doing so.
I mean, not to like defend, maybe like more skeevy developers. I don't know what's going on with them, but I've seen people be like, when like a project like is taking a bunch of time to come out, be like, where'd their $50,000 go? And it's like, I mean, in isolation, like, yeah, $50,000 is a lot of money, but it's not enough to sustain like 12 years of game development.
Right. Yes.
50, if it's more than a single person working on a game.
Right. Once you split $50,000 two ways after Kickstarter's fees, after the ones allocated for all those stretch goals, you've got two people working at minimum wage basically for a year, maybe.
I mean, that was the case with Luca. Like when I did my like financials after that year, it's like, oh, like I made this game on sub minimum wage.
Right.
Yeah. And I tried to make that my full-time job too. That's wild.
Sub minimum wage without the convenience of a company automatically taking out all the taxes you owe. So then you have to you have to factor in that too, which is like, oh, it's even less money.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a whole other that's.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to start this to sound all depressing, but
no.
I find this stuff is kind of interesting, especially when talking about like curation and even the whole idea of the Indiepocalypse, which I know is a little bit tongue in cheek.
Yes, it is. It is. For this. I've gotten good SEO. I'm slowly taking the turn of phrase back to mean just.
Yeah, that's awesome.
To the point where I have been like confused. I'm very fortunate that so few people talk about Indiepocalypse that whenever I need to say, for instance, get a radio post so I can copy and paste it for next week, I can just search Indiepocalypse and find my last one.
Nice.
But it is weird now that
I've done that with support for my games sometimes. When someone asks me a question, it's like, oh, I don't remember, and I like look up a YouTube video of someone playing the game to get to the part they had the question about.
So I've got to the point where when people do not refer to it as the Indiepocalypse and they just use proper noun by itself, I'm like, wait, are they talking about me? But
it's a great name, though.
Yeah, no, it's very evocative. That's why.
Glad you reappropriated it, basically.
Yeah, people still use it. It's coming back as people have publisher woes. They go, oh, is there? We're in the midst of another Indiepocalypse. The first one, of course, being because there were too many games published. Not that these indie game the movie breakout successes were people with like heaps of cash backing them up, and also a giant push from, let's say, one of the largest platform holders and corporations in the world. Hey,
right. I was saying earlier, I find this kind of stuff fascinating because, like, before I was a game developer, I remember seeing Indie Game the movie as like a college student.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, like I kind of want to be an indie developer, but there's no like company I'm like excited to work for, so maybe I could try that. But then I remember thinking, like, how did these people pay their bills,
Right.
And what I've found out, like having done it myself, is that they probably didn't, or they did it some other way. It wasn't through, making whatever game, unless, like you said, you like did have a deal with like Microsoft or whatever.
I've been championing these last few shows that I believe every partner that secretly funds an indie game by letting the developer not have to work should get an executive producer credit on that game.
Oh yeah, totally.
Not go unrecognized. Like, oh yeah, the person. Oh yeah, this. I was able to work on this indie game because this person I know and live with financially supports me.
Right. I mean, yeah, and I only was able to do it because I took contract work
Right.
working on other people's games, pretty precarious gigs for like a couple months at a time, and having like three roommates, so it split the rent pretty low.
Yeah.
Again, not to sound too doomer, but like looking back at it, it is kind of wild. Like, oh yeah, like I found out the hard way, like what real indie looks like.
Yes. Indiepocalypse, as low rent as it is built on a full-time job and a decade paying off debt. Like,
I have a friend of a friend who told me about, or this friend's friend would. I might be butchering the story, but he was interested in the like fighting game scene, local
yeah.
fighting game scene, and wanted to sponsor some players, to like bring up the level of competition a little. So he didn't have a lot of money, but he would put aside a little bit of his paycheck to like help pay for people's tournament fees or something. And they would say that the players were sponsored by JOB, job.
Yes. No, there's. Well, once you get out of like the higher stratosphere, you start to realize that there's basically no money. Like, there's a startling number of startling because the answer is non-zero number of people that have been in Indiepocalypse have said it is both the first time and the most they've ever gotten paid for making games, and payouts are not very high.
I could believe it about the like first time being paid that much.
Yeah,
but like I do think, again, not to like be all like, oh, but like art is so virtuous or whatever, but there is like something kind of special about like the people who do it without getting like $10 million in exchange for it.
Yes. Yeah, no, there is the hobbyist space is like like a fascinating space. It's been like, corrupted increasingly by the grind mentality, of like, because now it's like, oh, anyone making something here, you have a million avenues to publish it and promote it, so you should be doing that. So
the amount of social posts I was expected to make was exhausting. When we were releasing Death of a Wish, our producer Kev very handily like made us like a whole spreadsheet of just like day by day like what we were going to post about on all the socials, and that was like very helpful. But it's a lot of work, and I know that's like saying like, oh, like posting a Tumblr post is work, but it kind of is, especially when you're trying to make the game at the same time.
Yes, yeah, no, it is like, just posting this radio thing across 4 different social medias like takes time, and and
it's not even to like become the next most popular thing. It's literally just like I want people who are interested in the game to know that it's coming out.
Right.
I can't tell you the number of people who played Luca who were then like the day Death Wish came out being like, oh wait, is this like another Luca? Like they just heard about it for the first time, which is kind of unfortunate on like our part and my team's part. That's like, oh man, we didn't even get the message out. But it like I don't even think it's totally on us, because we did like do our best. It's just there's just so much vying for people's attention, even for like more real stuff, like like how are they gonna afford their next rent payment or something, and then that's before they even get to like, oh yeah, what Steam game am I gonna buy?
Yes, right. And then like getting it in front of people, it's the weird thing of how not people online would have you believe that everyone is online all the time when I log in maybe once a day sometimes. So if I'm not there that one day you're posting about Death of a Wish, I'll never see it. Like,
yeah,
it's
well, and there's so much too that it will get it'll probably get pushed really fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so ethereal
Right.
that you either need to be always putting the message out there, or like basically just get lucky with the eyeballs that you need to see it
Right.
put it up.
I think it's why I really emphasize that people are like, hey, have your own website. Have other people talk about your website. Talk about other people's websites. Like the more you get off of, like I have problems fundamentally with like the personal feed style of social media. I think it's just bad outright.
Mm. Yeah.
It's a very selfish style of social media.
Yeah, it's solipsistic, right?
Right.
Like just basically reflects yourself back at you.
Right. It's like it is just the things that I want to see, but also I'm speaking out onto my own platform. It's not like a community in the same way. It's not actually a public hall. It's a public hall where everyone is just looking up in the sky and yelling. And then sometimes someone...
That sounds about right.
Right. It's bad for it. It's why I thought it was really weird when I was at like a round table and there was like a DIY indie marketing. I was like, oh, this is interesting. But it was all like, make sure you're posting on TikTok and every other site. And only one guy was like, we post links to other people's games who are like ours and people we like on our websites.
Nice.
And that's like more sustainable, more practical. But indie marketing all aside, because we could spend forever on the subject. Colin, we're actually approaching
the topic of the week. So.
Yes. Oh, it is. I think I saw bits of it, but like I feel like that's always the topic. Something, but also how do I say that I am skeptical that anyone actually is going to do anything.
Oh, no, I mean, really the solutions are the kind of thing where it's bigger than video games.
Right. or how does one say politely, I think people who are posting these things are more interested in posting about them than actually doing anything about them.
Yeah.
Like you get the dopamine hit of 1,000 retweets because you said something smart about games should be more video game, more discovery indie good, and you get 1,000 retweets.
Oh, you should post that.
That
sounds good.
And then I get my 1,000 retweets, 3,000 likes, and I log off and don't bother doing anything.
I mean, I like that you brought up, and I know you do this just from seeing your posts, but like going to physical events.
Yes.
I mean, it's unfortunate that kind of got disrupted with
right. Oh,
COVID.
yeah.
And it's still not really like safe for a lot of people to do that.
Right. Like let's say you were launching an indie zine in 2020 and you're like, I can't wait to go to a bunch of events. And then...
Yeah. But one of the best things for Deathful Wish that we did do, and I was very fortunate that we got to do this, was we showed at both MagWest and MagFest.
Yeah.
The Music and Games Fest. And in their indie game section, and we didn't have like a huge booth or anything. It was literally just a table with the game and a couple monitors. And even if people had no idea what the game was, like just being in a physical space that people were like walking through to get to either one of the other games or one of the other exhibits or something, like it would catch people's eye.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, "Oh, that looks cool. I want to try that." And that's just not something that really happens on like social media unless someone's probably already geared to like be a part of your audience or to like find whatever circles you're in, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because people are like going to the two mags to like play games, to check out games, to like buy games. People are going to Twitter to do everything.
People are going to Twitter to dunk.
Right, they're going online to do everything in their life. So like there's the focus of I'd sometimes do better weekends in a tiny show in Providence than I do like online. I've had, there's a group of people that have come, like I was out for a couple of months doing other things and other events, and then they came back like, oh, it's this guy, he's back. And then
Nice.
they come and pick up, and I'm selling like 2,000, like when I did MomoCon in Atlanta, which was like an anime con that had like a little gaming section. I had like 2K in sales with like
Nice.
no gameplay really. Like I had one
Yeah.
game, I had one game up available to play, and most of the people who bought things did not play them. Like people are very curious, more so than I think we give people credit for. Like
One other like possibility I want to bring up, especially to my fellow indie developers who
Yeah.
might be listening, is I very recently, the timing on this is actually really nice. I finally connected with a like local indie game dev meetup. I guess not necessarily indie; it's just anyone interested in game development.
Right.
That I had some sort of like crisis of like, oh my God, I don't know anyone near me who like does the same thing as me. I feel so disconnected or whatever. So I like just tried to look up if there was anything like that, and there was a meetup group that hadn't been active for a while, but they still had a site and a mailing list, and so I signed up, and lo and behold, last weekend they finally had another meetup after a while, and I was expecting there to be like 3 or 4 people, maybe. Like I don't live in like what I would imagine is like a game dev hub. Like
Right.
I used to live in California, and that was a lot different as far as that goes. But now where I am now is like 3 or 4 people maybe at most. And the meeting had like 20 people in it when I showed up, and I was like, oh, like this is the thing that people are interested in, even if I'm not in a place where like there's a ton of video game studios that like have like jobs and stuff or things like that, or like in a major tech hub, and like that was like so revitalizing to see because I'm cribbing this from another friend of mine, but he's a big proponent of hobbyist game development, and like one of his ideals is that like the best games are ones made for audiences of like 1 or 2 people.
Right.
It's like the kind of like really like personal and like charged with personality experiences of like someone making a game for their their little friend group or something. And that is something I like kind of wanted to try to achieve, like to bring it back to my own projects for a second with Luca and Death of a Wish, where I mean obviously they're not the kind of game where I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna sell 12 million copies.
Right.
Already because like the art style is probably a pretty big limiter, even though I think it looks cool, but I understand it's not for everyone. Even like epilepsy warning aside. But like with those kind of experiences, like if you like show a game you made to like one of your friends who's interested in that sort of thing, they're probably going to have like a depth of experience with it and share that with you in a much more rewarding way than it is to get 10,000 wish lists on Steam.
Right.
Especially because those wish lists probably aren't going to convert at the rate that they used to.
Yeah,
but
it's the lifeblood. Right, it's a lifeblood of things that I crave, and I mean a lot of Indiepocalypse is me trying to get that sort of game out to other people to see, because I am sorry, go ahead.
Some of the moments that have made me like the most proud of like Luca or Death Wish is when like one of my friends messages me like, hey, like I played this, like, oh, like was this bit like a reference to this other thing we talked about once, or like, oh my God, I really liked this boss fight you did. It kind of reminded me of this like other thing that I know you like or whatever, and that's so validating, like because it makes you feel seen as an artist, right? Like I said, much more than like getting 10,000 wish lists on Steam.
Right. There's that spark of a human inside of it, They're like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
a person made this. And it is,
Yeah.
you know, if people listening are into that sort of thing, I mean, the kind of current, I don't know, reigning king of that sort of thing. How would you phrase it? I say go check out Domino Club. There's a lot of it in there, and it's all like very much, you know, in-group stuff made for an in-group, but also gets gets posted publicly.
Shout out Domino Club, but also shout out Vextro.
Yes, yeah.
It does a similar thing. I'm a part of that group, even though I've never actually contributed to any of their game collections.
Right.
Sorry, pal.
And there's, you know, there's.
That's the exact sort of thing.
Yes, I'm blanking on the one that like. There's another anonymous. I mean, there's Paradise as well, obviously, and there is. I'm blanking on the name. Litho Breakers, I think is what it is. They like just put out a collection, and I'm very. This is what gets me. Yeah, Litho Breakers, a similar like semi-anonymous collection.
Another thing I've like kind of gotten into recently that I think people should check out if they're into this sort of thing. And I met some of these folks at MagFest, and it turns out that we were mutual admirers, some of us. But the Western Toho fan game community, I feel like has a similar sort of energy, especially since it's explicitly based on like the kind of like fan game energy. You can like sell a Toho fan game.
Yes,
a lot of these developers do it like for the love of that. What would you even call it? Like that franchise or that world. And I think that's awesome, you know. And they've got some like great games coming out of that, just because it's like working with like a shared canvas, but then people get to put like their own spin on it. Like I played this one. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's from a developer that I know really likes Luca, so shout out to that developer. Where it was like a mix of like a dungeon crawler, but then when you entered like a random battle, it turned into a top-down action game, kind of like Luca. And I thought the idea was so cool that I wanted to steal it. I didn't, but I thought that was really neat. Anyways, I feel like I'm getting off track. But like if you're listening to this radio show and somehow don't have like a huge list of like itch.io games that you are meaning to play, like that's really like one of the like best places you can go to find like things that are actually exciting in video games right now. Especially because I hear a lot of people who are like, I'm so tired of video games right now. Like the PS5 has no games or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're looking at AAA, like it's probably not the greatest space right now. But you know, on the level of like the stuff that Indiepocalypse curates, like every month there's like so many new games that you could check out.
Yeah, I mean, I only featured like you would think that 10 a month is like, oh, I've got this person's got me covered for like alternative indie whatever for the month. It's like, no, it's still just like a tiny tip of an iceberg of like what is being made constantly, you know. There's like an infinite pool of, but before we get, this is too deep a rabbit hole to get under. And we have to wrap up the segment and move on to our next guest. But so I've got 3 important questions. I don't know if this one applies to you. I don't know specifically which guest this applies to, so I'm going to ask all 3 of you in succession until one of you answers. This is from Sizzle. And it says, tell us about your chickens. Can you answer on this? Colin, can you answer for this?
No, I am not the one.
Okay.
And if I am, I'm sorry. I don't know what that means.
Moving on to the standard Indiepocalypse questions then that I need to know. Follow up, or next question. What's your favorite type of rock?
My favorite type of rock? I don't know what it's called, but around where I live, there are like these sheer cliff faces that are created by like when like a glacier ran through the side of a mountain, and I think that looks so cool.
Perfect.
So that would be my answer.
And now this is a question I often don't know the answer to, or don't know if a guest could answer this question, but I feel like you're a little closer to being able to answer this question based on prior conversations. It is, do you have a favorite Toho character?
You know what? I wish I did. I'm a fake Toho fan.
Oh, yeah, you can just
I don't actually know any of the
you
characters,
can cite
so
it but
I'll
not
just say
speak on it.
Reimu.
That's
I'll say Reimu because that's the name I know.
That's knowing a name is the first step. And if you need to know more about Toho, tune in January to the Indiepocalypse pledge drive and sign up for the Toho 101, which
awesome.
I will be running as part of my segment. I've decided. But that's that aside, and I just mostly had to say that aloud to force myself to commit to it. Colin, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to move on to our next guest. Until then, I'll see you all in the other half of 2 minutes and 56 seconds, approximately. Hello, and welcome back to Indiepocalypse Radio. That was the Mountain Goats with High Hawk Season. We're here with our next guest, who you may know from the new hotness in indie development space, I guess, or one of them. Decker is John Ernest. John, how are you doing today?
Doing just great. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to ask it right now. I'm going to throw a twist in. Can you tell me about your chickens?
Sure thing. So I have two pet hens. They're named Pigby and Galena, and they're my pride and joy and kind of the unofficial mascots of Decker.
Oh, okay.
If you ever work your way through the games that people make for some of the game jams that we've held for Decker, there's often like an unstated rule to include a chicken somewhere.
Huh. Now I am thinking, because I've definitely seen, like, from a curatorial standpoint, an uptick. I think it was like 4 or 5. I kind of like with Death of a Wish, I would say, oh, just last month, but it'll probably be like 8 months ago that I got like a first thing that I saw in Decker, and then it is getting close. It is getting close to every other month or so, at least getting submissions. But if people are unfamiliar with Decker, what is it?
Well, so Decker is it's a little bit difficult to classify.
Right.
It's kind of a game engine from a certain perspective. I guess if you're a kid who grew up on Windows, you can think of Decker as being kind of like if you took PowerPoint and MS Paint and threw them in a blender with a little bit of Visual Basic drizzled on top. And if you were a kid who grew up with Macs, it's a lot like HyperCard.
Yes.
It's a drawing program, and then you can kind of layer behavior and animation and interactivity on top of it.
Right, and I've and people have done people do a lot of neat stuff in it as well. Like it is like it is fascinating to see every time like a newer tool enters, or like not even enters, but like once people start using it more and it catches on, and because there is like they start to develop their own language, and the nice thing about tools that is not just pure coding is that it allows people just to dive in almost immediately without having to worry about spending a year coding and learning to do that.
And also then having to port it.
Right.
Because one of the things that Decker has is it's got its own file format, and there's a native application that you can use for authoring and everything. But you can just export a single file HTML build that's easy to upload to itch or your own website or whatever you want.
Yeah.
And it just works the same. It works on mobile devices the same as on desktops. So you can just kind of You can also do a lot. I've tried to design it so you can get pretty far without having to write any code. And there's a lot of ways for users to make plugins and extensions that other people can use without having to know very much or any programming, depending on what kind of an extension it is.
Yeah, the thing I've come to really enjoy about these smaller, more specific engines is there's almost like an instrument quality to them, you know, where like they're made to make a very, you know, a mostly very specific thing. So sometimes people can do very weird things with them, and sort of bend them further and further from their sort of like intended purpose, so to speak. But you can see someone's like, oh, I'm in the mood to make like a Bitsy game or a Decker game or an RPG Maker game. So, and they are like filtering their ideas through kind of like the strength of that engine.
Yeah, and creative constraints is what it's all about.
Yeah. So they're not just like, and also I think it helps people finish things a lot easier when you don't have to do like, when you don't have, you know, infinity at your disposal.
Well, another thing that's kind of fun from like a flow state perspective is that, you know, it's a tool where you can author your graphics,
Yeah.
you can edit your sound, you can write scripts and everything without leaving this one tool. And so I've found that the range of things that I can do in just like one long sitting, while completely losing track of time, is really nice and fun.
Yeah, right, because you're not stuck with like, okay, now I'm going to transition to spending time in like a photo editor or, you know, soft or like a thing. And then it's like, then how do I? Then you have to go. Oh, I spent 3 hours making graphics, and now I don't remember what my game looks like. How do I put them into this? Where were they supposed to go?
Now I need to import the stuff, or maybe I'll need a library for loading PNGs,
Yeah.
or just, you know, being able to go directly from I'm tweaking the graphics. A lot of people have told me that it kind of reminds them of the character of Flash.
Yeah.
I mean, technically it's very different from Flash because Flash is all vector oriented and Decker is a decidedly raster oriented pixel art kind of tool. But the sense that you can just kind of like jam and tweak things interactively and immediately see the results.
Yeah, and there's, I think you mentioned porting, and I feel like one of the major benefits of all these things is that, you know, it's you don't have to worry like, okay, how does this build to consoles? How does this build to PCs? It's like usually they'll run on basically anything, or close to anything, both as editors and as like the output, which hugely opens up both like the amount of people that can like make and play these games. You know.
Yeah, I bought a $35 Chromebook specifically to do the best that I could to make sure that it had acceptable performance on like the worst computer I could buy, because I wanted to make sure that no matter what kind of device somebody has available, that I will give them the best environment possible.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was, you know, there's a lot of games and programs and things that ought to be able to run on 10-year-old computers just fine.
Yeah,
and it really just takes a little bit of polish effort to make that happen in some cases.
Yeah, I think this is sometimes another case of the problem of people in games who have too much money and they don't realize it. That computers are expensive.
Yeah,
they're like just getting a computer that will like run, you know, whatever, Unreal or Unity, just as like at a very extremely base level, you know.
I mean, how many tens of gigabytes is the whole Unreal SDK at this point?
Right,
Hundreds maybe.
Yeah, that's a lot. I don't even have like I'm not running this on a Chromebook, but 100 gigs. I don't think I have anything on my computer that is 100 gigabytes by itself. Anything like that, I would be like, it's like, how do I excise this from my computer as fast as I can? How can I use this and then delete it?
Yeah, and even if you're working with something like Unity, I mean the web exports that Unity makes obviously are capable of doing a lot more sophisticated stuff than you can with Decker.
Right.
But the builds are going to be tens of megabytes, and in my experience, frequently crash if you're not using Chrome to run them, and take minutes to start up. Whereas Decker is pretty much instant, and the baseline is like 400 kilobytes.
Yeah, and for how many versions will these Unity exports still work? How many?
Yeah.
There's a graveyard of Unity web games that just don't work anymore.
Yeah.
And that is, kind of like part of the problem of, just making something big that is overly complicated, and always computers are a weird thing where they just like are always up. We're always updating these things. We have to stop. Maybe we should stop updating computers and just leave them as is. We keep breaking everything.
Sooner or later, Moore's law is going to bottom out, and we're all going to have to just deal with it. Computers. Right. I mean, like single core performance has not actually improved that much in the last 10 years. It's just that now everybody can expect to have at least 4 cores in all their devices.
Right. You can see it very like just even from a game standpoint. You see like the drop off in like. I guess like the thing is that maybe they load faster now, I guess, but you see like the fidelity drop off very quick. So it's like, what is the benefit of increasingly pushing for like stronger and stronger and stronger hardware that is also invariably more expensive?
I mean, my theory for it, aside from just selling new hardware as an industry, is that for the AAAs, the guys who are running those studios understand that it's a lot easier to parallelize work on 3D modeling and level design than it is for game mechanics and systems. And so, you look at the credits for any one of these games, and that cost $400 million to make. It has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of technical artists, and then dozens maybe of programmers. The visual fidelity is something that they figured out how to scale with larger and larger projects. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting a better experience or more to do.
Right. It's kind of, it's the theme park descriptor of, blockbuster cinema. It's very big and very flashy, and it took a lot of effort to make, but it is like a very singular, like, I don't know, rush style experience. It's like, oh yeah, I went up and then I went down really fast and my body got excited. But was it a thorough, enriching experience? Or did I just feel the wind in my hair for a moment? And that is I guess the sweat droplets on a AAA character's face.
Yeah. And I mean, all the respect to the people that contribute to huge teams like that.
Yeah.
But I am certain that the people that are painting those sweat droplets could themselves be doing things that are a lot more interesting if they had a little bit more authorial control on a smaller team.
But this is something we alluded to when I was talking to Colin. This is not a game problem. This is everybody. All mediums are kind of condensing at smaller, more expensive things that pay out more, and the kind of like the middle is falling out. So the people were just like, yeah, I would love to make this project, but there is a realization is like this will either take me 15 years, or if you gave me, $100,000, I could hire people and make it in 2.
Yeah.
but there's less that incentive to be like, here's that $100,000, because that's not going to make them in turn 1 billion or whatever.
But meanwhile, there's more people with creative aspirations than ever before, and if they can be given empowering tools to get their vision into other people's hands, then that's fantastic and something well worth pursuing.
Yeah, they're even like 10, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, so many of the more like readily accessible. I say that, but I'm like, oh no, am I once again being crept up on by time? But what were like the easily kind of just like, I don't know how to program, I don't know how to do anything, but I want to make games. What tools can I use? Like, I feel like the number of those is increasing like more and more every single, like it's been increasing at a more meaningful rate in this past decade or so, because there's both this drive for people to make games and this drive for people to want to help people be able to make games.
Sure. There's also been a big rise in this concept of a fantasy console.
Right.
What people probably are most familiar with Pico 8 as an example of something along those lines. But there are a bunch of other tools that take that kind of a perspective, and it's really just carving out a set of creative constraints. You make some certain things easy and certain things limited, and then the process of game design becomes kind of this this interesting puzzle. How do I fit my interesting idea into the space that I have here? How do I take advantage of what these tools can make really easy for me?
Right. Because it's not, you are like, oh, I want to, you can say, for instance, I want to try making like a Decker game, as opposed to, I want to make a game, this is what my idea is. Like, you can start from the idea of, I want to work within this engine, and see what that engine has to offer. We spoke around a lot, but what was your initial like desire to be to as someone who made one of these tools? What made you say, I want to make one of these like little like sort of fantasy console kind of things, fantasy PCs?
Well, so HyperCard was a tool that I used as a kid. It was available on old Macs, and it was in certain ways really easy to jump into and play with and build things, and in some ways it was kind of daunting. And just as a point of history, what HyperCard is probably best known for today from an indie games perspective is that HyperCard was the game engine that was used to make the first version of Myst, which is a game we've probably all heard of. And it was used because it was an accessible tool for the pair of guys that made Myst and several other moderately successful games leading up to that. So I was I really wanted to make something that had all of the nice capabilities of this tool that I used to have that's no longer available on modern computers, and along the way also try to address some of the things that I saw as weaknesses. And now that I have Decker as this tool that I can actually be a user of rather than just an author, it's like a digital Zen garden. I can just full screen it and remove all of the distracting, frustrating parts of my computer and just be in this place where I can make stuff. It's a relaxing space.
Yeah, it's very much, that goes back to, you don't have to switch between a bunch of different windows to work within it. You can just sit down. You could even turn off a second monitor. You don't even need that thing. Presumably, of course, everybody has those nowadays because we need to be more screens without.
Well, you can always have a second monitor up for documentation, but
or just a video running on the side to distract your brain as you have to like find a way to function. But yeah, that it is. So, and you also mentioned, hosting Decker jams, which is also, something, Adam does with Bitsy. And is like, do you find like that was like part of what like really got people into Decker, or did it feel was there kind of just sort of like people would slowly flock to it naturally? Like, do you feel these things kind of like grow as you do jams and as more people use them and people go, oh, what is this? I also want to work in this kind of thing.
Well, I think that hosting jams around the tool is a really good way to expose more people to what sorts of things are possible.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like, we just wrapped up a recent jam for Decker, and we had 22 entries, which by and large were insanely high quality and really ambitious. And I have seen a lot of people in the comments on that and in external discussions about various games that were made during that jam, people say, wow, I had no idea it was even possible to do something like that in Decker. This makes me want to try this tool out. And, another thing about games that you make in Decker is that they're all kind of inherently modular and hackable.
Yeah.
If you can play one of those games, you can open it up in the tools and start poking at it and taking out pieces and seeing how everything works. So in a way, every one of these games is like a parts box for the next person who wants to try to build something. And I think that in terms of like forming a community around it, it's just a very slow, gradual process of finding people that this tool speaks to.
Yeah.
And I mean, Decker has been publicly available for about 2 years. And in total, I've spent about 4 years working on it. And we're just now kind of getting to the point where there's a community forming around it and an increasing level of awareness about it. I think there's a lot of people out there that if they knew that this existed, this might tickle their brain in the right way. But it's difficult to find those people.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking anecdotally, and the first, where is the release? How do I find release dates on these things? 41, so that 14 months ago. 14 months ago was the first Decker game that I received. So that I like as a submission that got passed. I think it was also the first submission that also just passed all the way through to just being included. But that is, and I've been starting to see, like, just anecdotally through my avenue, it's been picking up a lot more lately, to the point where, you start to see it more and more. It's exciting to see people catch on to these, like, oh, yeah, like the excitement of someone seeing, like, oh, my friend, I just saw a game made in Decker. What is or like you mentioned, they have these visual language to them, so someone can look at that and go, oh, what is that? Especially if you see two of them, you're like, oh, these are made in the same thing. What were these made in? And that kind of like draws them to like checking these things out and being like, oh yeah. So what is this Decker thing? I think it's one of the strong benefits to an engine having a clear aesthetic and visual language to it,
like a flavor and affectation to it. And it can be difficult. It cuts both ways to an extent. There are some people that are just kind of like repulsed by the way that Decker looks,
right?
Or they think that it's it looks too retro for them, and they just don't. It doesn't align with the kinds of things that they want to make. But I also, I have users who just like immediately saw it and got what I was doing and love it. Yeah. I think it's probably better to be divisive than to just be middle of the road.
Yes, they must. I feel like the thing I tell people, one of the things I tell people, the most important mentality I adopted, even in my run-in to starting the zine, is just like at events being like, hey, not everything's for everybody, When people go, oh, have you thought about changing this about your game, or I don't like this about your game, or like feedback in general, is go, sometimes not everything's for everybody.
It's true.
And it's like sometimes more beneficial to turn people off if that means you'll get a stronger reaction out of other people.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because it is like, granted, I'm like an indie sicko freak, you know, so I love whenever something has like a very strong style to it. But whenever I was like, I like seeing it, like I like being able to like sort of visually recognize very quickly, like through like the kind of I don't know, maximalist UI style that a lot of people adopt of like, because they're working within. Like it feels like you're playing within the editor, you know, kind of like how you imagine, you know, when you're doing all the work in the editor, you live within the engine and the editor feel like they're one and the same.
Well, I mean, what's particularly fun is that Decker is actually really good for making tools to help Decker.
Yeah.
So, you know, the line between programming something in Decker or developing it and using it is extremely blurry.
Right,
and,
right.
I mean, like I build tools for myself with it all the time. Like I have a, you know, very exciting household budgeting application, but it's this totally plastic thing where every time I have something, a new question that I want to answer, I can just rearrange the UI or add a new thing or change the way that a query is written. Like you don't have to make a thing and then seal the box shut and then ship it. It can be this living modular thing.
Right.
Like with Decker, you have the option to export a game that is locked, which basically just like hides the main menu and hides the tools. They are all still there, and there are various ways that you can get them back. But it's kind of just like it's like the little like lock that you use on like your diary or something.
Yeah.
It's not actually a security device. It's just
right.
Like, please don't inside.
Right. Right. It's kind of like, you know, exactly the lock. It's like if you want to get through it, you're going to get through it very easily. But
you can ship a game that's just like open, and that like the program that you see on itch.io has the main menu bar, and at any time you could stop playing the game and just start changing it.
Yeah, and then like with games being so easy, like it's so easy just to transfer the entirety of a game from one person to another person, that allows someone to then just like dig in and like see what the process of it was.
Like one of the things about Flash that I always was kind of frustrated about was, I mean, unless you pirated Macromedia Flash, which you're pretty justified in doing,
right?
It was incredibly easy to play Flash games, but it was a lot harder to modify and create your own Flash games. There were decompilers and things that you could use to crack apart somebody's published thing and figure out how it worked, but it was hard, and it was literally reverse engineering. Whereas with Decker, like if you can play a Decker game, you are just inches away from having all of the development tools right there in front of you, and the immediacy of that makes a big difference, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, it goes. Unsurprisingly, I advocate for more people, like just basically games being much easier to make. Like the easier it is for someone to just go from one day not making games to the next day deciding they want to make games. Like it's help. It's the infinite health of the medium, you know.
Absolutely.
But that said, John, we are. I've got a couple questions for you. You've had time to prepare. Are you ready for them?
Sure thing.
Do you have a favorite type of rock? Oh, no, sorry. What this is not optional. This question must be answered. What is your favorite type of rock?
I think basalt. It's actually possible to process basalt and extrude it into textiles, which have a whole bunch of really interesting engineering applications.
Ooh. And follow up. Do you have a favorite Toho character?
I'm sad to say that I am extremely ignorant of Toho, and my knowledge of it basically begins and ends at bullet hells and bad apples.
Okay, well, I mean, Bad Apple's knowing Bad Apple will get you through any rhythm game in an arcade if you don't know what the other games are or don't know what the other songs are. It'll be your anchor. Are there any Deck or Toho fan games that you come across any made yet?
Not yet, but I once made a tech demo of egg bug spraying 99 plus notification things in a bullet hell pattern.
Okay.
Maybe somebody will use that as a seed to pursue this.
That'll activate them. Well, John, thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. We're going to go on break, and we'll be back with our third guest in roughly 1 minute and 52 seconds. Goodbye for now.
Hey, for all.
Hello, welcome back to Indiepocalypse Radio. That was The Replacements with I Hate Music. I used that for my business cards. My business cards just say Indiepocalypse, I hate video games. And on the back they say, sometimes I don't. And so far as I can tell, no one has been like, oh, I know what that is. That is brazenly stolen from that, freshman effort of The Replacements. But anyway, before we get too in the weeds of all this, we are here with our final guest of the show, who you may know from issue 54, 55. Oh, crap, I'm on 56. Issue 55 of Indiepocalypse with Any Sand. It's Brian. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. First off, finally, I can return to the safety of... Well, I should ask first off, do you have any chickens we may or may not know about?
No, I don't have any chickens. Sadly.
Okay. Now, second follow-up, my informal marketing survey that I usually tend to ask, which is, how did you hear about Indiepocalypse?
Oh, Lord, that's a good question. Probably Twitter.
Okay. It's serving its function.
Yeah. I think Twitter, and then probably a bit of like word of mouth, but word of mouth via Twitter.
Yes, it was a good place when you could use your mouth to provide words there.
Yeah. Back in those days.
In fact, when it did, there's a time when everyone kind of hated it, but not hated it for the specific kind of reasons they hate it now. Just kind of hated it as anyone hates any large collection of people where everyone is there and yelling.
Mm-hmm.
But like it was good. It was good to have a place that everyone was like, oh, it's fine. We can post our things here without having to be like fully dedicated to the website. My sort of ongoing issue with other social people want you to be too committed to their websites, and it's like, you'll never get me to like a website.
Yeah. I avoided it for so long.
Yeah.
And then I ended up participating in Twitter a little, actually kind of not long after I first started working on video games more seriously. And then I don't like it, but I also have met some cool people through it.
Yeah.
And so and then I feel like there's like a particular, as much as there's like a very, very high like noise to signal ratio, I feel like there continue to be people who are just so smart and cool, just like drifting around out there talking about stuff. And so it's like, yeah, now I feel like I'm sort of stuck wanting desperately to get away forever.
Right.
And also sad that I would lose some of these ambient connections. Yeah.
Yes. Might I suggest inventing a radio show and inviting those people to talk to you on it as a way to build? I think of Twitter and I guess other kind of social media sites as a great place to meet people, a terrible place to talk to people.
Indeed, that is true.
So I use them as quick ways to like, oh, I know this person now. Now come to my house, my digital house,
exactly,
where we will talk about things, and then I, once every 4 years. But I'm what's the word? Isolate not what's the thing when you're antisocial, but not because you dislike people, more because you just are fine with being by yourself. Whatever word that is.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, comfortable in your own skin.
Yes. So I'm like, yeah, I've talked to people once every 3 years. What are we, best friends?
Yeah, perfect.
But that aside, if people are unfamiliar with with the recently fresh on its own standalone Any Sand, how would you describe it?
How would I describe it? I would describe it as when you reached out to me and asked if I wanted to make something for Indiepocalypse, I was excited, and I was like, okay, what do I want to make here? And I kind of cycled through a bunch of ideas, and then I felt like, well, I feel like we're just in this moment in the world where all this terrible violence is happening to Palestinians, and I feel like I can't get away from wanting to speak to that in some way, and that kind of gets into this tension that I feel like I always experience when I'm working on game projects of like, well, I'm personally like very big on like, I think there's a lot of alluding to real world things in games, and that can be very effective or ineffective, and there's a lot of like kind of circling issues that, again, like, I think people do with varying degrees of success and kind of nuance, but I'm always kind of interested in like, well, what happens if you just talk about the thing directly, which has its own, there are many caveats and I think risks and challenges and potential benefits there. But so this for me was like a project where I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about this, but I'm going to try to talk about it from my perspective, which is someone who's kind of, for a lot of my, kind of adult life and a little before that, tried to be meaningfully engaged politically with a lot of things that don't necessarily impact me directly. And in this case, I started thinking about, well, what's it like when you are, how can I fictionalize this a little bit to make it interesting for me instead of just something that's like completely straightforward? And so I started thinking about, okay, well, what if there's, like this near future that's kind of a projection of some parts of my life now, and people I actually know and people I'm actually connected to, but I'm sort of imagining a future in which the political and social and human outcome that I want to be true, which is that there's a free Palestine in the world, is just like a given. It already exists, and then this conversation is happening between someone who's old and remembers when that wasn't true, young, and is sort of like has always just taken that for granted, and is sort of like learning that there was a very difficult struggle, and it's still really an ongoing struggle to kind of like make that be. And so as you can probably gather, like, for me, that whole like narrative frame was like really the thing that oriented me towards the project. And then I really like point and clicky, simple, kind of just like be in a space and explore it mechanics. So from there, and I have this kind of endless project where I've been kind of building this toolkit for myself to make these kind of point and click adventure games for a long time. So every time I get to work on something that uses that tool, I also tend to spend a bunch of time trying to improve the tool. So this is what happened.
right there is that is it's something that maybe feels like it sometimes curses games more than other. And when I say, the thing is, when I talk about games, and this exists in another post in my brain somewhere, of like, when people talk about games, like 95 to 99% of the time, they're talking about like commercial games and like the like entrepreneur class of developer. That's they're not talking about the medium.
Yes.
Because to be like, oh, yeah, games usually skirt around actual subjects and the artist feelings. Just like, well, not if you're really digging around an itch all the time, but in like the broader scope, if you are just like playing the video games that come delivered to you through your content chute, they're like, they might put a flag in a background somewhere and go, ah, yes,
Yes, yeah.
I'm conversing with the subject that's happening in life. Insert different flags for different subjects.
Exactly.
And that's the extent with which, but people express themselves through art, and it is more, I think, meaningful to just like, hey, just like let yourself, like, what are you feeling, even if it's messy, even if it is like an imperfect presentation of an idea, because I think that's also a thing that people run into, of like forgetting that people are imperfect and can present ideas imperfectly,
Absolutely. And I think, well, and like, I know for me, like, long before I ever tried making games, and I don't know how unusual this actually is, but like, I always feel like I'm kind of unusual as a game developer in that I played a lot of computer games when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
And then like old PC games. And then I kind of just like lost interest for a long time. And then I sort of, I'm not even sure how I drifted back this way, other than that I had a good friend, and we were living in 2 different towns. I'm from the States originally. I grew up near Washington, D.C. and
okay.
but I've lived in Toronto for 13 years now. And like, and my friend was back in the DC area, and we were like, well, what's a project we can do together, like not living in the same town? And we were always trying to come up with stuff. And at some point we we're like, oh, let's make a video game. And, right. But really, like, before that, I mostly did a lot of music stuff. I was in bands for years and helped, organize kind of DIY kind of punk stuff in DC. And like all that creative community was so process focused and so non-commercial to begin with. And I think when I finally came around to games, I was just like, it felt pretty natural to me that like it would just be another like process medium. And I think it's been like a constant like jarring experience for me to remember, like you said, that 95% of people in games, even though it is this like creative process that's very, very complex in many cases, like do kind of just like approach it from a more capitalistic like business perspective.
Yeah.
I'm always shocked by that, because I'm like, I just can't wrap my head around. I mean, I understand it, I can zoom out and be like, yes, I understand this is the world that we're in, but like it's just such a rich process for me of like, you want to make something and there's probably going to be something you look at, and there's probably going to be something you listen to, and there's probably going to be words of some kind in this, whether it's explicit narrative or it's just kind of infused in the thing. And so like, I think that, that process is just so cool in and of itself, kind of like fuck the product. And then also like, if it's, like the idea that you could possibly make something, as with any piece of art, that's going to be like the ultimate iteration of your idea, is like, you're never going to get there. And that's what's cool about it. Right. Yeah. And what's fun is you just keep making stuff, and hopefully that stuff can be in conversation with other people's stuff. And I mean, that's, to me, why Indiepocalypse is so cool is like, it's just some of this stuff is just so weird.
Yes.
And exactly the way that art should be, because if I recognize something, and this is, maybe a something that I shouldn't do, but like the more I recognize something, the more likely I am to just kind of pass over it. And if I don't recognize something, and if I'm like, I don't understand this, then I'm going to engage with it. Even if I ultimately it isn't resonant for me, I'm at least like, this is somebody made this. Like I can imagine a person making this.
Yeah. I think the other, like a thing that's kind of poisoned our modern brains is like needing to understand something and needing to let everyone know that you understood something, when it's like perfectly fine to come away from a piece of art and be like, I didn't fully understand that. That's like a fine. That's sometimes is actually a benefit to, like, maybe it will click with you like years later, and like your perspective changes. You're in a different situation. You're like, oh, wait a minute, this makes sense now. Like I get where this was coming from. This kind of solving of art, but also like the process. I think that's why all those groups, all those like kind of unofficial loose collectives we were mentioning in the first segment. A lot of those are forming probably because people love the process of making games together.
Yeah. But, and I think one of the things that John was speaking to that I find just really compelling too is that, like, with Decker specifically, that idea of like, if you're playing the game, in many cases, like, you have immediate access to somebody else's process, or some aspect of somebody else's process at least. And I love that so much, because I feel like one of the coolest things for me, when I'm interacting, with a game somebody made, is like when I start asking questions about like decisions they've made, and I'm like, oh, is that on purpose, or like, and not like in the sense of like, oh, is that a bug or whatever, but just like, you start wondering like, oh, is this narrative thread supposed to end this way, and like, did this person, because did somebody just lose interest in this part of the story, or was this like a time constraint for them, or was this a really intentional decision? And
right.
I think it's satisfying just to ask those questions, but then when you have the added layer of like, oh, and now I can go like root around in the like detritus of their process, and like maybe actually come up with an answer to that question, whether it's the right answer or not, or accurate to what they were intending or not. It's just like this whole other layer of like, it's got also like this like House of Leaves thing where it's like games are just like bigger on the inside than they are on the outside.
Yeah, right. Because
and I love that.
There's that implicit quality of just like, here's the thing I made, but underneath it is all of my informed experience going into it. That like,
yeah.
I think a lot. I don't remember the exact turn of phrase, but there's at the end there's like small, not interviews, the kind of interviews at the end of the Carmen line, which is a release of a comic artist book. I show it to Glacier Bay Books. But there's a line in there from another artist that's like, reading their work makes me want to try to understand the person who made it. Like, like they see glimmers of a person in there, and they're like, oh, like you can kind of understand parts of the lived experience, and the idea of, engaging with this art makes me want to understand more the person who made it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so critical to, in a like, maybe I'm sort of showing my age or whatever, but like it's like I experience, like, one of the things I struggle with a lot in like online spaces in general is just like, I feel like a lot of these spaces have gotten really, really good at like taxonomizing everything. There's just like so many complex like subcategories of things, and it's cool in a way because it's like, it turns me on to stuff that like I've just never heard of otherwise, or that I realize I align with some of these little subcategories in ways, and I'm like, oh, that's neat. Like even if I didn't have that name for it. But on the other hand, it's like it can create this like illusion that we are all just like these assemblages of the categories that we fit into.
Yes.
Rather than like, people with like very dynamic emotional experiences of like every moment of our lives that is also going to show up in our art. And I think like, everybody chooses to bring that into their creative process in different degrees at different times. And then I respect that. But like, I think that I'm always like, anything that gets me back to that headspace of like, we are all people making things. Like for me, there's no such thing as like a video game per se. There's just like, this is just a broad technical vessel or whatever,
right?
Like media vessel, yeah. And it's the people that are always going to be the fascinating part of it to me, is like, because people are just really interesting and cool.
Yeah, it comes down to once again, a good reminder, we made this is all shit we just made up. Everything we have, we just made up. None of it's real. Like video games are a thing we made up. All these taxonomies are things we simply made up. Go into your yard and ask a squirrel about, is this a looter shooter, or is this a Metroidvania? No concept of the phrase.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, but it's a thing that I struggle with personally. Struggle is a severe term for it, but it's it's why on my kind of like starter guide page I have a Gurn group game, as I call it, expert level, which is kind of the kind of like unidentifiable, like these are still exist within the arguable video game interactive space or whatever, but you can't call it a Metroidvania or a puzzle platformer or
well, and I think there's a thing that I think about a lot, and a bunch of projects I've worked on is like, I kind of got interested, I feel like in as much as it's just an inversion of a term. Like,
Right.
it's not that useful. But I was this idea of like anti-games, where it's like, well, what is like a non-game that you are still willing to engage with in the way that you would normally engage with a video game? And I like, and I think like screensavers are like I really like the screensaver as a concept,
Yeah.
which is something that you're like compelled to stare at on a screen that like may or may not even really be interactive, but that still kind of tickles some part of your willingness to just like behold this thing. And like I think often games, like when it comes to the kinds of emotional things that games try to evoke, it's often on a pretty epic scale. It's like big feelings of like love or betrayal or conflict or whatever. And I'm also like really excited about games or game-like experiences or anti-games or whatever that are focused on like incredibly mundane, like sensory things. Just like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like the feeling of, like I made this game back at the beginning of the pandemic where it's like, you're just, in a bathroom and all you do is click around on stuff in a bathroom and like, and I was like, how far, because, and of course this is a time when many people who were lucky enough to be housed were spending a lot of time in their houses just
Clicking around their own private, clicking around throughout their own bathrooms.
Yeah. And I was like, and this wasn't even my bath.
Yeah.
How much, what interesting stuff can you like do in a bathroom for 10 minutes or whatever, twiddle all the knobs and faucets and open the window and close the window. And it's mundane, but like, even for me making it at a point, it just sort of becomes like, there is some evocative potential there, but it's just like, it's like daily, it's evocative of a daily kind of routine, like mind space that I still think can be quite cool. And so I like when people are kind of like playing with that idea of like, just like a game that is not big in any of its ambitions. It's just like, here, like watch a bug buzz around for a couple minutes.
The wide world of games that exists outside of little guys getting points.
Yeah.
Not to say that I don't like when little guys get points, of course.
No, that can be fun too. Exactly.
But there is like it's a thing where they're very different experiences.
Yeah.
In where it's like sometimes you want to sit around and you do want to watch whatever, like I'm gonna watch a quiet avant-garde film or whatever, and sometimes you're gonna have a Dune night with the boys,
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes too, you start doing the one, little guy in points game, and then there's just like some aspect of it that feels like maybe it's superfluous mechanically, but like gets interesting, and then it's like, oh, what can you like extract out that little element of something and make a game about that? I don't know.
The two things I often try to encourage, or 2.5 things I try to encourage people to play is like, with Indiepocalypse, obviously play games, go on itch.io and get off the homepage. And really dig around in the muck of like what is in here, and I use the word muck very positive, in a very positive turn of phrase, but like really dig in there of like these kind of like non-games or what it post games, like what is, and slowly like the fun thing about art and like your own tolerance, so to speak, of it's kind of like, think of it like spicy food, if to use a more universal, like some people who have never tasted might go, Tabasco spicy. In the same way you go like, anything that's like outside of the extreme marketable mainstream might seem odd, but spend 5 years with it and you're like, oh, these things are actually all quite normal. And because you become very adapted to it, and then you forget like what is like normal and approachable. And it's a weird thing, and he's like, oh no, I thought this was like a normal relatable thing, but it's like kind of weird and outside the regular frame of like, but it's easy to like get in that mentality of like things aren't that odd, like once you look past like what makes them odd relative to the mainstream, and it's just kind of what you're used to more than it being odd in and of itself.
Yeah, well, and I think really within that, like a lot of what you start to notice, I feel, is like intention, as opposed to outcome. And so like you'll play something and you'll be like, you know, like if you just try to take it, you know, if you try to assess it as like, you know, a capital V video game, you know, it's like, you know, you may only, you know, it's just not, it's not going to serve the intention of that part, because somebody's like getting at something more complex than the mechanics allowed to fully flesh out, or somebody's like, yeah, it was just using like, yeah, the kind of vessel of a genre to like talk about something more interesting. And I think like you start to, I think once you kind of just start filtering out the like your like video game expectations, you start to notice all these other little things that people are doing where you're like, you know, again, that person underneath becomes more perceptible, and it's always going to be an interpretation on you unless you actually meet that person and then can talk to them about it. But it's just, yeah, it's like a whole new way of engaging with that stuff. Is like, what was this person thinking when they made this, or like, what do I think maybe they were thinking, and then what does that make me think of, or whatever.
Right. There is like, you know, never the fact that people made it is easy to forget, and the, like, you know, the similar to like that adaptability and that kind of like looking at their intention. Like, I also often recommend people go back and play old games, you know, and you realize that like also you can adapt to those. Like, you go, these games age so poorly, and then by your third Kingsfield game, you're a pro at using all. You're like, oh yeah, of course I can navigate a camera with the shoulder buttons. I'm an expert at it. It's like, and you go, oh, these are intended to be played like this. Like, like they it's not like they chose not to use a right analog stick for camera movement. There was no right analog stick to use for camera movement. Yeah.
Well, and I think, you know, also this sort of, you know, builds off some of what you and John were talking about earlier around like, you know, like I don't know what, I mean, obviously, like I hope people continue to be able to engage with this medium in a lot of different ways in the future. But like, you know, there are some more dire versions of like the not too distant future where like we don't all have access to like, I mean, already we don't all, and maybe we shouldn't, but like where maybe like a computer with, you know, that draws as much power as computers draw right now to run modern games just like isn't something that you take for granted. And instead, if you want to play video games, you're playing them on some, you know, I mean, still very powerful, but comparatively less powerful, like, you know, Raspberry Pi type thing.
Yes.
That, you know, and then it's like, well, what's going to run on that? Because that's going to be representative of this entire medium in that context. And it actually, and it's weird. Like, I really like, you know, it's like everyone who makes something, maybe this isn't 100% true, but by and large, I think like anybody who makes something makes it for some personal reason, I hope. Right. Even if ultimately that reason is, if that reason is just to make money, it's hard, because then people sometimes just make crap because they're like, I'm going to get rich off this or whatever, and that's a bummer. But like usually there's some personal something in what someone has made, and I think that like you never know like which things people made are going to survive long enough.
Yes,
whatever. Yeah, whether it's because there's like some sort of technological collapse, and then, you know, it's only games that run on like TI-83 calculators that anyone can play in 1,000 years, you know, and people will be like, well, this was the medium of video games or whatever. And,
no,
and you know,
listen, we're all Ozymandias' foot, you know, just hanging around.
Yeah.
Being like, look at my Metacritic score, look upon my Metacritic score, and be amazed.
Exactly.
It's something I sit around. I often, when I'll have movie night with my friend, and we'll hang around, and we like to talk about it. And something I'll sometimes pull up old, like, box office stuff of like the idea of like what is the cultural lifespan of any piece of art, and like how much stuff barely survives a year or a month or 5 years. Like what perseveres and what causes things to persevere. And it's like a thing to think about. Like, think of how many, like, you know, best game of the years do people still think about? And how long do they still think about them? The thing that was the most important. When was the last time you thought about Pal World? When was the last time somebody thought about Pal World?
Yeah, and likewise, I'm like, the stuff that has stuck with me and stuck with me and stuck with me, and I'm sure everybody has their versions of this, it's mostly stuff that I encountered at these like random formative moments in my life where I happen to be particularly porous, or, you know, to something, and it's like a lot of times that stuff wasn't quote unquote culturally significant.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was, but sometimes it was just like stuff that really struck a nerve with me, and I just returned to it again and again and again and again. And I always think about, I mean, specifically in the context of video games, it's like, yeah, like all this, it's kind of like you were saying with the Kingsfield stuff. It's like, when I think about these games that, I played when I was a kid, all these, the old, I mean, same kind of stuff as a lot of people, old Sierra games and stuff, even some of the old, like weirder, like learning company games and stuff like that, where I'm like, it's so easy to be like, oh, if they could have, they would have made a game that looks like a game in 2024. And it's like, but I'm not convinced that's true. I think that was the game. The game that they made in 1990 was the peak of their idea at that time. And like maybe they would go on to make other stuff too, but that thing is complete. It doesn't ever need to be remade or remastered or whatever. It just stands on its own. That's like, what does it mean to just accept that? Yeah.
It's why I like to use FromSoft as an example, because there's the remake Kingsfield is Dark Souls. It is.
Yeah,
Like their ideas, they're just making the games their ideas. They just happen to become popular.
Yeah.
But they're still making the same kind of games within the same sort of like mental framework for the most part.
Exactly.
And there's like there is so much stuff like that. But speaking of things that just kind of like last forever, Brian, I gotta know, what's your favorite type of rock?
Oh gosh, I've been thinking about that. I guess I don't know what type of rock it is, but I really like just very flat, smooth, round, small rocks that you can try to skip on the water.
That is,
those are my favorite.
If this was if Indiepocalypse was ultra popular and had a wiki, I would feel like, and someone was tabulating favorite rocks, that would actually be a higher ranked rock. The platonic ideal of a smooth skipping rock.
Yeah, they got something going.
Yeah. And follow up. Now, how are we going to do? Do you have a favorite Toho character?
I honestly have no idea what that word even means.
Toho.
I was like Googling it when y'all started talking about it earlier, and I was like, I mean, I know what bullet hells are.
Yes, Danmaku as they called.
Yeah, and that's like as far as my literacy with that goes.
Well, we'll make sure to sign up for January's Toho 101 class, where you can learn all about Toho from a non-Toho. I'm not a Toho expert, but that's also why it's a 101.
Nice.
Anyway, we don't have time to get into the extent of what Toho is. It's a long-running Dojin game franchise, primarily bullet hells. But as we mentioned earlier, anyone can make a Toho game, sell it commercially within certain parameters. Nice. Famously made by Zune. He looks like he's always having a fun time. He's got a giant beer in pretty much every picture I've seen of him. Seems like he's enjoying life. But that said, we're going to go on our break, and we'll be back on the other half of 1 minute and 59 seconds. Brian, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you.
Hello, and welcome back to Indiepocalypse Radio. That was a short-time savior of Indiepocalypse break music, Minutemen with Storming My House. We're back with the whole crew. Welcome, whole crew.
Hello.
Howdy.
We're talking about, like, what if you gave people just money to make games, and wouldn't it be cool if they just made games? And I think the curse of that, of course, is that people always want money in return. They want to make money off of those games, and it's like, so really the problem is the publishers. You got to make publishers be like, what if you didn't make money? And
I think that there are a lot of publishers in the indie space that have sort of gotten into this really weird perspective where they can like, hey, we'll market your game and distribute it for you. Like they've completely forgotten that the original purpose of a publisher was to like give the seed money so that the thing could be made and take on the risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If I've already made the game, like
if I've already made the game,
or whatever, but
yeah, I was talking about this at Game Loop last week, but it's like that makes sense in the traditional publishing model of I've made a thing, but everything needs to be published physically, and I as an individual don't have the means to publish my book or my film physically, and here publisher do that for me. But as like a digital good, I guess you're just paying basically for a PR firm, or
Yeah.
or not even paying.
You're paying. Yeah, you're giving a company like a big slice of your baby that you spent years of your life making on, so that they can like take the keys of your car and drive it off a bridge.
You're right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
into hopefully a giant pool of Scrooge McDuck style money is what they're hoping for.
Yeah. Well, and I think the stratification or like the centralization of resources is such that publishers just have so much power. Like even the relatively small ones, it's like because it's like I think we've all kind of talked about this in different ways, but just like the difficulty in like getting anyone, even just like making people who would be into the thing you're making aware that it's there.
Yeah.
It's so high that, and publishers are just like, well, because there's only 25 of us or whatever, like we just completely can gatekeep the visibility of anything. And so it's like they kind of expect you to be willing to give up kind of as much of your thing that you're making as they ask for, because they're like, well, otherwise, like, back down in the rabble you go or whatever.
I see that you've made a queer visual novel. How about we rework that into a heteronormative first-person shooter?
Yeah, exactly.
I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I did meet with a publisher back when I was developing Luca that asked if I'd be willing to change the art style,
No.
which is really funny.
Right. That's like changed into what? Right. It's very like into, I don't know. Did they give you? Was it even more cursed? Where did they say change into our style similar to X popular game?
No, this was ages ago too.
Okay.
It was like in 2016, where I feel like the landscape was a little different, but it was definitely like, I was like given like the rundown about the game and stuff and what I would need. And they were like, all right, let's talk about the elephant in the room, though, how the game looks. And then it was just like, we don't know how we would market something that looks like this.
Right. See, that's
like, okay.
because that's very odd. Because that also depends on like what the perceived audience is. Because I would be like, I'm like, oh, you mean the art style is like very distinct and like immediately distinguishes it from other games. It's like
it's. I don't even know what
right.
it would have to look like. I really think it is just like if something looks like too not like what people imagine as an indie game.
Yeah.
Which I guess at that point was like, what was that at that point? Hyper Light Drifter, like Owlboy, like these very like polished pixel art. Like everything has like immaculate animation and things like that. I don't know.
There's like a little element of truth to how there are certain art styles that like they work in motion, but like stills of it really don't, convey what it's like at all. And that can pose certain challenges for marketing. But I mean, like, that's your job. You're marketers.
Right.
Figure it out.
Yeah, I think go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say there's also like how many games do not present like within that marketing structure at all anyway, like that very visual forward, gameplay forward kind of like style, like tons of them. I would argue, probably like of the ones that get made, maybe even the majority of them. Yeah,
and I think the irony too is, I believe, I'm not sure that this is true, that probably, like if you're making a pitch to a publisher and they're responding positively before they turn around and tell you to like completely change your game, probably a lot of what they're reacting to is that you seem like someone who could deliver on the thing you're promising. And I think the irony of that is that like they're actually responding to you as a person, and they're like, oh, like seems like maybe you have your shit together and you'll actually make this game, or you've like made enough progress or whatever that like, or your vision is clear enough that we believe you're actually going to make this. But then they turn around and they're like, but can you just remove all of yourself from it first? And it's like, it's such a bizarre contradiction.
It goes to something where I've like demoed games for people at like various stages of development, and sometimes it's funny like presenting like a more like complete game, but that is like maybe looks like more abstract or something. I often get the comment like, "Oh wow, like this is really fun. Is this the final art, or is this like what are you going to replace the placeholders or things like that?" And I've had to be like, "No, this is what the game looks like." So I mean, maybe this probably feels obvious to say, but I'm sure there's like a popular conception of what a game should look like, even though, I think some of the topics that we brought up today even is like there's a whole constellation of what could even like qualify as a quote unquote game. But there's probably a few steps that need to be taken there for that to not be a popular response of like, oh well, a game looks like X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Like if it's a side scroller, it looks like this. If it's a first person shooter, it looks like this. What the heck is this? Like I'm just clicking around a bathroom. What kind of genre is that even? Yeah, like that sort of thing.
This isn't parkour or menus.
Yeah.
I saw that got pasted into my own Discord that is blissfully quiet, and I got very confused by it. That notion of like, well, but then I stayed out of it. That's the kind of thing you would get me to discuss in person, but I don't want to. But it feels weird to. It's also that's a side tangent I will not get into, but it is like a very like I've noticed anecdotally as someone who like goes to a lot of events, relatively speaking, that this kind of like more traditionalist notion feels like it is an older person thing, and it feels like as more people like grow up where games always existed as like an artistic medium, they have more like leeway for like what a game can be, because there's less like they have less of that like software toy baggage that comes with being and like growing up with the earlier eras of video games, I guess.
Well, I mean, you look at like the data about who like the average video game player is currently, and it's like someone who plays games on their phone, on their way to work or whatever, and it's games like Wordscape or something like that. It's not Mario or Halo or Call of Duty or something. I feel like I'm even like aging myself just by those being my references of like, oh, what is a popular video game? That.
Like a lot of the great sages, the established game designers that like created these universal genre categories, like got their start or had their first exposure to video games in like arcade cabinets and stuff, which had a very specific kind of instrumentalism to them. Like ultimately these are all machines that are supposed to eat quarters, and they have to fit in this box, and they have to be immediately understandable, and so on and so forth. And then like, I mean, my generation was a bunch of kids that like learned about video games through things like Newgrounds and like this total chaos realm of kit bashed random stuff that's on this like complete spectrum from like slideshows and animations to very elaborate strategy games.
Yeah,
they're all one medium,
Yes, I feel like people often Newgrounds gets forgotten as indie games. I feel often like as a cultural sphere for like, oh no, there were a lot of games on Newgrounds.com that like shaped a lot of the way people thought about games, or like even like I spent a lot of time. A lot of my quote-unquote indie game experience, I spent a lot of time playing custom games in StarCraft, too. Oh,
yeah.
That is like, And that itself was like a weird hotbed of design. You know, if you've heard of like Dota, or
like the genre of tower defense
Yeah.
games, like just came and Dota or MOBAs, I guess more generally.
Right.
Like they came from, you took this at the time extremely popular genre of real-time strategy games and then deconstructed it into these like subsets that became their
Yeah.
own thing.
like a game jam is kind of why I like, if this would mostly work if StarCraft was freeware, but
Yeah.
I
mean, like, what was amazing about StarCraft custom maps was that you just connect to a server and it downloads the map, and you have this crazy new multiplayer experience. And nowadays, the closest to that would be like Roblox, I guess, which has its own issues.
Right, because it's more heavy. Like Blizzard was not monetizing
Exactly.
Custom maps. Like when I played Blizzard was not getting cut, nor was like, who am I thinking of? Like whatever parent company I'm blanking on the name of, Toei or whoever, was not getting a cut of me playing my 8 million Dragon Ball Z games on StarCraft. But I would. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's interesting too how like I feel like an implicit thing in a bunch of the examples that we're talking about too is just like, this chasm between something that's essentially commercial, like arcade machines, and something that's just pretty essentially non-commercial, which is just people playing around with the tools that they have to make stuff that they want to share with other people. And within that, I'm sure there were people who were like, oh, what if I could do this for a living? Or they did figure out a way to do that for a living. But like, I think so much of what has hurt, I mean, even with something like Newgrounds, it's like that was like during that stretch of time when I feel like I wasn't really doing a lot of video game stuff, so I sort of like missed that whole era. But like, my sense is like most of that stuff, people are just making stuff to make stuff. So what has happened in the last 15 years is this. I mean, this comparison has been made a million times, but like, it's just like with all these like underground music scenes that finally record labels noticed and said, oh, well, how can we go around and kind of like cherry pick people and acts that we feel like can be commercialized, and in so doing they commercialize the entire idea of being an underground band, which is like antithetical to what being an underground band was for so many people for so long. And I feel like the same thing has happened with indie games, where it's like now most people I think almost take it for granted that if you're making an indie game that it's like some sort of like you're trying to like you're essentially still trying to like make it as a game developer just on your own, versus like maybe you're just making stuff to make stuff. And it's not to say that you wouldn't be happy to make a living doing it, but like your primary goal is not to find an avenue to commercial success. It's just like you want to share your ideas.
Yeah, like the path to making money has become much shorter. Like, if I was uploading my thing on Newgrounds, like I don't have the same thing that I have on Itch, which is I just press a button and now I do it. Now it's a paid game,
Yeah.
And that is the kind of like, oh yeah, I have to the ability, like the tools to make a thing more commercial are easier to access than ever. Which kind of like when you need money for food and to survive, you go, well, I guess I should, if I can, maybe I should. And then you're like, well, if I want to, then I have to do this. And that's kind of like, it's very easy to slip into that I need to adapt myself for a commercial market mentality,
Well, yeah, and when people do come to you and say like, oh, I could help you do that side of things.
Yeah.
Like just right away, like the compromises start to pile up really fast.
Yeah, because it's like, well, it's like, sure, I will change my art style. What do you want it to look like? Give me $10,000. I'll make it look like anything you want. What? How many pixels you want on the screen? More or less, I can make them. But it is like
that also reminds me.
Yeah.
This minor tangent, but there was also someone I talked to who I have a great amount of respect for, but they wanted a game that I was pitching to be like, how about you make it multiplayer?
Right.
Which is very funny. It's another very funny thing to suggest for a game that's not already designed to be multiplayer.
Well, this reminds me of so Teardown, the amazing like physics destruction simulation game.
Thing, yeah.
Yeah, it was like purchased by a company that was immediately talking about like, oh, we'll just spin this amazing technology and make it multiplayer. Like, are you insane?
I've also told this story a couple times before, but it amazes me. My very first game dev job I had was working on a spin-off mobile title for a big AAA franchise. And 3 months before we were supposed to launch, the publisher of the title said, hey, I know this was supposed to be a free game just to funnel people into the bigger game, but what if we made it have microtransactions? And had to completely like redesign the entire like system of the game to even have something that'd be quote unquote worth spending money on. It was a disaster.
Brutal. Yeah.
Just make your boat fly. How hard can it be?
You already have the boat. You did the hard part. You just put wings on it, right? That's what flight requires. Yeah, it is. Exactly. It's the curse of independent monetized art or whatever. And there's kind of like, how do you escape besides not monetizing anything or not worrying about monetization, which is sometimes, a tricky ask. And, I'm not here to solve art, I guess. I put that hat up a long time ago, and I'm just kind of hanging out.
I was misinformed. I thought we were going to solve art right here and
now. No. Maybe if you caught me 2 years ago, I would have been like, hey, here's I'm going to break it down. But eventually, you just get tired, and you're like, you know what? Maybe people will catch on in the next 6 years or whatever. They'll come crawling back to old Andrew, or someone if you're out there and you got a ton of money, just give me a ton of it, and I promise to do the exact same thing that I'm doing right now, except I will add more zeros to all the money that people get.
If only.
Yeah.
Really weird that all the people who have that kind of money don't do anything cool with it like that.
Yes, right.
This is sort of the nature of accumulating.
Yeah. I think that kind of gets at what I said during our segment, where it's like, I think a lot of these problems are bigger than video games.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. They are bare minimum an artistic problem that expands across all medium, but more realistically, societal issues that spread to humanity. And you just kind of
on some level, we're about as well prepared as an industry to solve this problem as like cake decorators are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You forget that there's like problems that you exist in your own small, tiny microcosm, and everyone else also has their own little microcosms that they are also worrying about constantly.
Yeah. I do think it's really hopeful, though, because I feel like in some ways, there's the big problems that we all have to fight for together.
Yeah.
Making sure people have, a place to be and enough food to eat and can make ends meet and all that stuff. And those are, obviously they're not about video games or any particular industry. They're just about, social equity or whatever.
Yes.
But what's so cool to me about, and what's so hopeful about, sort of, again, getting back to this kind of like stuff like Decker or, these like tools that just continue to make what can be a very opaque process like more and more accessible, even if so many of these different little engines and frameworks and stuff are very intentionally constrained, and sometimes I think people don't realize that at first, and they come in and they're like, oh, a game making tool, like I can finally make Skyrim or whatever, and then they're like, oh wait, I have to figure out how to make Skyrim in HyperCard. But it's like at the same time, it is going to create this wellspring, and it is creating this wellspring of people who are just making stuff and making and making stuff and making stuff, and no longer waiting for there to be like a top-down, like benevolent answer to any of these questions, which I think is really helpful because there's people just like making stuff for each other.
Yeah, it's why I often like to call engines instruments, because like you're not going to expect to pick up a guitar and have it sound like a trumpet, you know.
Yeah.
So,
but at the same time, you know, if somebody decides that they earnestly want to make something like Skyrim, but they're using Twine or Bitsy or Decker, then like what comes out of that might be pretty darn interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And the same thing. You run something through enough pedals and enough distortion, you're like, oh, what was this instrument originally? You're like, this was Decker originally? Are you sure? And then you press your little button, your little menu pops up, and you're like, oh, I guess it is. Huh.
Yeah, and because you made it in Decker in 500 years, you know, when everything has to run on a pocket calculator,
right,
it's going to be the thing that survives.
Yeah.
It'll be the Decker version of Skyrim that everybody's writing their analysis papers on.
Yeah, it'll be the canonical Skyrim in 500 years.
It's you know, it is weird to think about what art does survive 500 years, you know. There's very small bits of it here and there. And
everybody laughed when I added support for exporting cuneiform tablets. Well, we'll see who's laughing in 500 years.
When it's sitting in a museum, when someone's like jam gaming is sitting in a museum and people are trying to wonder what it meant.
Yeah, it's like which one of us gets to be like the Hieronymus Bosch of like 2500.
Yeah. Yeah, that is like part of, you know, that's part of also why I started like publishing things physically. There's like a benefit to having things floating around and being able to pass things to other people. Like physical things occupy cultural space and just like our mental headspace in a way that digital things do not.
Yeah.
Like I have from when I went to Austin, 2 unopened other people were doing little similar cassette publishing things, and I have them unopened still, you know, like you do with things you get at events that you never. But I as I pass them on the table, I do think about them a lot more than my, you know, endless zip files that are sitting on a folder in a folder called Indie Games, you know.
Totally.
Because I have to like walk by them, and I theoretically can pick them up and move them around.
Absolutely.
But that all said, we are approaching, or when I say approaching, I mean we have passed 2 hours on this show. So we are entering what I call wrap-up mode, which is when I try to start to wrap up the show, and then sometimes go on for another 30 minutes. But before, as we go there, does anyone else have any like kind of like last minute important questions, non-plug questions, statements, things they need to get out, as we sort of start to enter the end of this? And I will take the seconds of silence as a no, and I'll continue. I will start to wrap it up. Well, thank you all for being here. First of all, true fun thing to do every week, to kind of get everyone in rooms together where we wouldn't normally be in rooms together. I sometimes will travel around little bits and parts of the world. You know, I was up Canada ways for Canzine relatively recently.
Oh, nice. Cool.
I wanted to go again. I want to apply again this year, but cannot because I will be in Ohio for a different unrelated event.
Very nice.
It just happens to be scheduled on the same weekend. But this allows us to not have to worry about pesky things like travel and spending $3,000 to go to San Francisco or whatever constitutes being a real game developer.
3,000, what a deal!
Yeah, right. Well, I that's to travel to it. I didn't say to stay there and eat there.
Oh yeah.
And nor was that to the cost to attend the event. What a what a nightmarish thing. Whatever. This is, that's why when I talk about entrepreneur class of game developer, the kind of person who can be like, yeah, I'll drop thousands of dollars to go to an event that will pay me $0.
Yeah.
Or I guess theoretically, if you get in there for contracts, it's something a little different. If you can get like work out of going there, but the idea of when everyone's like, oh, I love to go there and hang out with my friends, I just think you have too much money.
That's the magic of academia. The pay is terrible, but you can get comped on going to your conferences where you sit around with your friends and talk about technical stuff.
I was going to say, yes, either you have too much money or you work for a company that will pay your way there. As the show was delayed, I had to pick up someone who was paid to have a week-long, not vacation, but you know what I mean. But that all said, Brian, you're first up. We mentioned your work. Where can people find your work should they want to continue to find it?
Probably, well, I have a website. It is whosewoods.org that you can go to. And that links to all my
perfect
stuff. Yeah.
Having your own damn website. Nothing better than that in life.
I love having my own website. There I am.
There you are. I have people's websites ready.
Sweet, thank you.
And that's who's the proper WHOSE.
Oh yeah, whose woods?
Not the question. We're not asking whose woods these are.
No, I'm telling you whose woods these are.
Yes.
And yeah, that's me. And yeah, it's just I'll just also say like, it's been really nice to meet y'all, sort of in this more personable way and chat. And thank you for having us.
Glad to have you. Where is John? You are up next. Hello. Where can people find that? Where can people find your work?
I also have a regular website that's beyondloom.com. And from there, you can find all kinds of weird internet projects that I've published. I also have an itch.io, and I'm sometimes active on co-host. And in all of those mediums, I'm internet janitor.
Yeah. And it's also a perfect site you want to go to and remind people a website can still just be black text on white background, and that works as a website. And like,
it works.
You don't need if you're worried about having a website, folks, you know what? You can also throw in a little blue there for things that are links. But otherwise, like, hey, don't overthink it. Like, there's a lot of strength to just having a space that is your own that you can point people to, that if not being dependent upon other people's websites existing or being run properly is a great feeling.
Anyway, I second the notion. It was great to meet all you guys, and this was really fun.
I'm glad I could facilitate. That's part of the other part of this. Like, it's good to get people in this room together and kind of help, because it's difficult online. It's like I'm gonna comment on this person's page. It's weird. I said this towards the top of the show. It's weird. It's a very like weird, unequal kind of social interaction that I don't like and I like am uncomfortable with. So I imagine there are probably other people like that too. But to wrap it up, Colin, where can people find your stuff if you're looking to have them find your stuff?
Hi there. So I don't have a personal website, but
get out of here. Get that.
Yeah. You should get Death of a Wish, the brand new hot game. We do have a website for that, deathofawish.com, that just it shows you all of our links, like to where to get the game on Steam, Itch, Nintendo Switch, all that good stuff. And you can sign up for our newsletter there. Hopefully I will be using that to also talk about future projects, but I think that's a good way to follow us. And you can also find our social links there. So once again, deathofawish.com.
Yes. And I did not type it out. I just like, oh wait.
Or linktree.ee/deathofawish.com.
Yeah, but deathofawish.com. But that was the easier one for me to paste because I think it was like on a Twitter page and those turned like T-codes or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, those are annoying.
Yeah, this is a great show. I hope people enjoyed listening.
Yes, that's the thing. I always wonder is like I enjoy. I don't know if people enjoy the second catchphrase of Indiepocalypse Radio is. I don't know if people enjoy listening to it, but I do enjoy doing it a lot.
Yeah, that's all that matters.
Yeah. For my part, I will say, of course, hey, go buy Indiepocalypse. I think it's cool. I recommend you purchase it. If you'd like to join it, of course, it's indiepocalypse.com/submit or indiepocalypse.com/Patreon. If you want to do, for instance, spend a mere $5 a month to get just the newly commissioned games. There's 12 games from, like, you know, all-stars of the alternative indie game scene, I would say. If you get issue 54, eventually, not only will Brian here get approximately $5 through PayPal at some point, that the Indiepocalypse promise, but you also have access to, you know, I'm blanking on the Daisy Chain, a game made in Decker. So you get it's like two birds with one stone there for our guests here. And you know, you mentioned up at the top, but this month's Tape Club, if you know the precursor to Death of a Wish, Luca, Born of Dreams, is the Tape Club game. If you want to get that physically, in a little.
Yeah, I have one. It's really cool.
Yeah, I part of me doing is that you have one. I have like 70 of these things sitting around my house, and I think they're all very cool, and I like to have them. And I just think that when I first did them, I put them all on my shelf. And I was like, oh, what if I just kept them on my shelf and did not sell them? But I was like, that's like 50 cassette cases. I can't just have those sitting around my house. That's bad business.
I also wanted to say I'm really excited to get the Hit Me one.
Yes.
That was just announced. I really like that series.
There may be, and if you wait for a couple months from now, there may be other little special Hit Me bonus coming through.
Oh, nice.
Like Ziri, I forget how to pronounce the name. We've spoken, but in my brain, it has left my brain because it was like, oh, we spoke to them not too long ago. It's probably 3 years since I've last spoke to them.
Yeah.
But I may have wanted to contact them around when the time they contacted me. But yes, no, Hit Me, cool things. And like that's the benefit is if I can go to, you know, I'm going to Anime NYC like at the end of this month, and you know, if you're deep in the indie shit, you're like, oh, of course you know the Hit Me trilogy, but like, how much does the average person know? But like going to those events, you can be like, people are like, oh, what is this? And they can like, you realize how small, however important and big and all-consuming any community feels, you realize how tiny it is once you step outside of it. But that's it. I don't think I have anything else to say. Nothing. I'm wrapping it up. Oh yeah, if you want your game on tape, and by tape I mean USB stick inside a cassette case, I think that's pizzapranks.com/tape market. Submissions are open for all game developers. I basically print them at cost for you. Either for you to have, or for you to sell through my store, or for me to sell at events, or all three. All of them work for me. Just trying to spread the format around. That is it. Colin, John, Brian, thank you all for joining me here today. And you out there, thank you for listening today. Got him again. These are all going up on YouTube slowly. I finally converted the last of them into like uploadable video format, and now it's just the process of uploading like 70 or 80 more videos to YouTube, I guess, because some people probably prefer it that way, I guess. I don't know. It's a thing I can do in the background of doing other things, so I'm like, why not do it?
I think I'll appreciate because I can send it to people.
Yeah.
Ditto.
And everyone's listening to video podcasts nowadays anyways. That's the new style. But I'm never going to ask people to get camera ready. That seems... Unless I have a studio... That's the Indiepocalypse Radio promise is you never have to get camera ready for this show.
I can't wait for 5 years from now when there's Indiepocalypse TikToks of people with those huge microphones
Yes.
saying something with
Oh yeah.
the AI subtitled.
I've got I've got little Indiepocalypse branded mic flags. We're sitting on a room.
Yeah.
I'm going like, oh my gosh, so Mario, you guys. What a weird little guy. He runs around and I'm gesticulating. I mean, I would love to have a studio show. I think I pitch every year that for PAX East of like, I think I probably just need to line up guests in advance and then I might be able to get a panel maybe. But I would love to do a produced talk show with like, and hire like a local band to be the band there for it to do the interstitials.
Nice.
But production wise, impractical for me. And also I've never seen an online everyone's recorded remotely that I thought this looks good. So I would rather not do it. Goodbye everyone. That's the show. There it is.